Story 1. Mind on Fire. It's funny, in a way, how even the most sickening of experiments or discoveries can be covered up by time. The way that some people can just move on from something even if it is inhumanly brutal. Some things can never be forgotten, and some will suffer, however. Such as these didn't include the article laying spread out in my palms. 37 British troops found severely mutilated from barbed wire. One missing. I should explain. I'm a 19-year-old student from Central Maine. Every once in a while I call into this library about a mile from my school. It remains as a dusty, red-bricked relic, gathering enough knowledge over time to be a great source of information for whenever I need it. Whether that information is remembered or forgotten, on one such day, while rummaging through the World War I history section for a school project, I came across the article previously mentioned, planted inside a book detailing trench warfare and all major discoveries surrounding it. On page 52, lodged inside, was this article, along with a small letter still sealed with a large, red, waxy splodge. As soon as I touched the article, taken straight from an old newspaper, it felt dilapidated and eerie. The yellowish color contrasted with the fresh white feel of the book. Below the image was a photo of the troops before they were found dead. A squad of 37 young men ranging in age from 19 to 25, standing in 3 rows, with what looked to be the inside of a trench as the background. It stated that those men had only just arrived from Britain before they died. Fresh from the barracks, I thought. To its bottom left was a much smaller, separate image of the man who went missing. The small print beside the image stated that he was the last survivor of the previous squad when the new one arrived. He seemed more mature than the others, and definitely far more vicious. A tattered black beard and an ominous bloodshot stare shone through to me from the black and white image. To add to its current eeriness, he was also smiling, and not just a stark, casual smile, but a massive grin showing portions of his gleaming white teeth at either end. Charles Patrickson, last seen on May 16, 1916. Image taken on May 14, 1916. And as I sat back in this old, vast library in late 2017, I suddenly felt curious to know about Charles Patrickson, who and where he might have been, and where he eventually died. I decided to head off back home and do some more research on this event. The library was still in its ancient phase and hadn't any computers, which came across as unfortunate. I checked out the book and strolled back to my apartment, tightly squeezed in between a coffee shop and pharmacy. All the while as I walked back, though, this uneasy feeling swam around me, the corner of my mind retaining that image of Charles staring back at me with that toothy smirk. On some of these flashbacks he would move a little inside the image, not much, but just enough to notice. He swayed gently from side to side and kept up that unblinking stare and disturbing grin. When this happened, I would have to stop on the street and clutch my temples. I eventually arrived in home feeling awful and slumped back on my office chair to hear its frail creak. I craned open my laptop and booted it up. While that was happening, I flipped open the book to page 50 to where the newspaper clipping was lodged. That's when I heard something slip out of the book and land on the wooden floor beside it. It sounded thin like paper, but still retained heaviness. I bent over the desk and suddenly remembered the envelope that came with the clipping, sealed with red candle wax and partially covered with a greenish mold. And then I knew I couldn't stop myself. I knew that I was going to open up that envelope and read everything it had to offer. It possessed that ominous quality about it, the type that lingers in your mind and begs to be revealed. I reached down and picked up the envelope. The sides, sealed with wax, came apart relatively easily. The wax even felt slightly spongy. At that time, when I opened it up and took out those diary entries, I was eager to learn more, that I didn't take into consideration what these entries might hold. My professors always acknowledged my expansive sense of curiosity. If only I'd known what I was about to read through, would I thrown all of it onto a massive bonfire and erase it from history forever. But there I was, willingly reading the final diary entries of Charles Patrickson, last seen on May 16, 1916. May 10th, 1916, it's only me now. I'm the last one left of my squad, the last to leave me. Thomas, a mad Irish traitor, sprinted from me last night. He feared starvation for a reason I can't understand, due to the capacity of food left. He was shot down the moment he peered as we hid out the edge. Rifle shots seemed to stifle into him from every direction. From my position, the body was kept upright, flailing around due to the constant gunfire. He then tumbled onto the patchy grass outside the trench. This was exactly how the rest of them went. At these times of disloyalty were the only times that the enemy fired anything other than the gas. In the times when I don't have the gas, the putrid odor of their corpses deprives my sense of smell. Although none of them are lying with me inside the trenches, they lie near. I hear the rodents and flies which are attracted, and I hear them biting and chewing and scratching. At first, the silence from the enemy frightened me. That constant absence of bullets. I hugged the lice-covered walls and prepared for a vigorous surprise attack from any direction. But then something happened. About 10 days ago, there were at least 20 alive back then. Sometime around noon, we were shelled from all around by a new gas. In some spots it was as if the gas poured out of the walls. There were multiple cries and shouts to warn us, but they were lost in the thick wall of smoke the gas created around us. I couldn't see anything, be it 1 foot or 20 feet from me. I thrust my hands down to the utility belt, tightly secured around my waist. Reaching down in a mad effort, hoping to find a gas mask, I found no mask. It suddenly occurred to me that I wouldn't be able to breathe in a matter of seconds and die a choking, painful death. But I didn't. In fact, that feeling I had with that black gas was better than any other I've ever felt. I was feeling high off my heels and no longer found life to be a thing to worry about. The gas almost talked to me. It said, "Charles, it's okay now. You're doing just fine." My mother's voice. The war was totally forgotten about. The darkness lasted about 20 minutes. When my sight was regained, I stared across the trench to find the rest of my fellows still standing in the same position as before. Their gas masks seemed like frightening beasts. The entirety of the squad returned my stare as they flung off their monstrous masks in shock. The high feeling of the gas hadn't completely faded, and I uttered, "GG, chaps. Lovely weather we're having, you think," followed by my answer to the gas's effect from my experience. "Like dancing on angels, sir. Like not being down there." Then there was Private Harry, poking his eyes out from behind another, that same indignantly awestruck expression. "Charles, Are you feelin' right in the head there?" There was a tinge of Northern Irish in his voice, accompanied by the tone of a man far older than this. Giving him a nonchalant smirk, I reassured him that he wouldn't have to worry about it. Ever since then, I've longed for the gas to come again. The gas makes me happy. The gas is my medicine, my friend. I'm beginning to wonder if saying that sounds crazy. I don't think it does. It carries me out from this disgusting war and into the free lands. It's not here now, though, and I am the only one left because only I was lucky enough to embrace the gas when it comes. Please, oh, please let the gas come soon. I just love that damn gas. Until the gas comes again, yours sincerely, Charles Patrickson. May 14th, 1916. A long strip of barbed wire surrounds the trench's rim. It usually appears hateful and twisted, but the gas helps that. The gas can and will help everything. When the gas comes, it looks like a big, tasty candy cane for me to gobble up. It is the only thing visible in the gas, by the way. But I have bigger news. More recruits arrive today. A fresh batch ready to be eaten up. Many were uneasy due to my appearance and attitude. They described me as looking like a monster. But I took this as a joke. Through the reflection of me in the puddles, I could clearly see just another smiling face. They also brought an old cameraman who took our pictures. He took my one separate to the others toward the front of the trench. I gave my best smile and asked him if he would be staying to die with them. He gave a solemn sort of laugh and told me that he would head back soon after taking mine, and the Germans let him go just like that. When my whole squad previous had dared to dart away from the gas, they'd been shot down instantly, but now one man was able to leave. But that doesn't matter to me much. I told the young men about my gas. I could tell by their expressions and shared glances of insecurity that my advice would not be taken and their gas masks wouldn't be tossed over the side, although it means that they won't be able to share the profound, exotic feeling of my gas. It does mean more gas for me, right? Distributions of the gas have increased. I am given one in the early morning, another in the afternoon, and a final one whenever the sun sets. It makes me feel better than ever before, but the longing feeling during those times absent of it have increased in severity. I sometimes wonder why the Germans haven't killed us already. Perhaps they are stocked with nothing but the gas and are not cruel Germans here to kill, but to instead share their gas with us. It confuses me, it does, but I'm still glad of it. Praise the gentle soul who created this gas. Praise him, praise him, praise him. I salute you. Gas of peace, gas of forgiving. Charles Patrickson. May 15th, 1916, I overhear them sometimes, talking about me. The recruits, you see, they think I'm crazy. Crazy, they are crazy. They refuse to embrace the gas's majesty, and they think of war and violence and cruelty. They think of many things. They have a plan to make a mad rush out of the trench and all the way back to Britain, just like the last of my squad. After the gas began, that's the only time they were shot at. One by one the fools tried to escape, but were picked off from seemingly everywhere. And now I think I know why. You see, we received some intercepted enemy intelligence today, which explained how the gas shelling us was called Geistfeuer, which translates to mind fire. I respect its name and pledge my allegiance to mind fire and wherever it take me. Praise mind fire, praise mind fire, praise mind fire. Charles Patrickson praises mind fire. Charles Patrickson praises Mind Fire, Mind Fire, Mind Fire, Mind Fire. I slammed down the worn paper to my desk with that. This was messed up. This was so damn messed up. But there were still 2 entries remaining. Screw this, I thought, and stood up from the desk and walked out to the kitchen. I began to pour a glass of water with the glass clutched in a shaky hand, when suddenly the title of the article flashed into my vision for a second. 37 British troops found severely mutilated from barbed wire. 1 missing. Charles Patrickson and his gas had cut into the flesh of my mind. I tried not to think of those 2 things together. It was surely just a coincidence. I glanced down suddenly to find the glass overflowing. I gulped the water down like a cow and paced back to my desk. Everywhere I looked now, there he was, staring back at me with 2 crazy, bloodshot eyes and a massive grin. Maybe he just went insane and ran off into the woods. That didn't make sense, though. The gas was in the trench and not in the woods. Plus, he would be shot down almost instantaneously. I gave a distorted cry then, as he had suddenly appeared here, sitting atop my desk, feet dangling from the edge like a puppet. He was smiling wildly, but in the spaces where eyes should have been were too dark, caved in holes that seemed to stare through me. The air felt heavier around here now. No, this couldn't have been real. I was being hysterical. Yes, Sal, you got it. I murdered those men, Sal, and now I'm coming for you. The hallucination screamed in a deep, deafening tone. I began blinking vigorously, hoping it would get rid of this disturbing hallucination before me, and it did. That wasn't real. I sat back at the desk once more and continued reading. I knew how this was going to end, but still felt frightened and curious at the same time. May 16th, 1916 today was a great day for me. They said I did well. The men in the pink coats said that. They are my friends now. I can have all the mind fire I want. My room is very small, but it feels like paradise. It smells like perfume. Now they want me to write down my achievements from today. I hope you enjoy it, sweet sir. This morning, before the usual mind fire donation, I overheard my colleagues chatting again. But this time they were even more angry about me. Apparently I had been screaming that night in gibberish which had scared them to death. I couldn't remember this. It wasn't me going insane. It was them ignoring mind fire. They were planning on killing me the following night in my sleep before I went totally mad. They have turned evil because they have denied the possibilities of mind fire. They are jealous, repulsive. I thought to myself that they all had to die. All I wanted was to enjoy my gas. But then they moved in and ruined it. I bet that they only really want to kill me to have mind fire all to themselves. I couldn't let that happen. But I knew I couldn't do this on my own, not without mind fire. So I waited, leaning up against one side of the trench until it came. It was raining today, and rain meant that the water would pile up at the bottom and soak our shoes. It caused the mud to appear shiny and slippery, but that was okay. I didn't really mind. I knew that using my rifle would be far too loud to get the job done, so I searched for a new weapon of choice. There were knives and grenades, but nothing that stuck out to me. I decided that due to my worshipping, mind fire would guide me through this. And that's just what it did. When it finally came at exactly noon, I became so excited. We were a team, Charles Patrickson and mind fire. When we were done, we'd be able to dance all night. I noticed a small river that had been created by our feet. It continued to rise as the gas's blinding darkness entranced me. It was somehow beautiful and vibrant. I realized that I still wasn't carrying a weapon, and for a second I was frightened, but Mindfire showed me the path to take. I couldn't tell you why I did it, but I glanced up to see the big, tasty candy cane of barbed wire surrounding the rim of the trench. It was clear to me then what I was supposed to do. "Thank you, Mindfire," I screamed from the bottom of my heart. "Thank you for your gift." I felt no pain after that, as I tore it down and wrapped myself tightly with it. Snug as a bug, we rolled around in the brown river together, me, Mindfire, and the barbed wire candy cane. I laughed out loud. This was fun. We were funny. I grasped the two ends of the barbed wire in each hand and flailed them around wildly as I began to trek through the everlasting darkness. It only took a second before I found my first victim, one of the youngest, 19 maybe. I tore off his gas mask with glee and mashed a handful of wire into his face and neck. I had to practically hug him to stop the squirming and resistance. His cries were reduced down to a crimson trail that trickled down his uniform. As he was released, a lifeless body fell back and splashed into the water. I felt relieved already, and I kept a joyful grin as we continued through, relieving ourselves as we progressed. Most went down without much of a fight. Barbed wire is quick to tear flesh. Our only injury was a stab in the shoulder through man's last desperate attempt to resist Mindfire. He died a tragic and abrupt death. When all 37 had been executed and the gas had cleared, I gazed down upon my achievements. The previously dull river was now beautiful blood flow. It somehow flowed angelically, and yet, gazing around at the men's corpses calmly bobbing in the water, I still wasn't purely satisfied. I felt as though their mockery still lingered in the air. I took another march through the trenches wrapped snug in that sheet of barbed wire. This time I aimed to make sure none of the men could be recognized by appearance if they were ever discovered. Mindfire was a religion now, and they were all going straight to the gates of Satan. After my second glorious round, everyone looked more like pieces of meat from a stew wrapped up in shredded uniforms, covered in muck and blood than actual people. It looked all too similar to an attack from a large pack of animals, so I knew then that I had to leave my mark. I heaved each of the disloyal traitors to the front of the trench and began to form a pile. As new bodies were added, I intertwined the barbed wire through the assortment. I made sure that everyone was packed in tightly to form a box shape. Arms and legs jutted out from places, but the natural shape was generally retained. I could no longer smell the stench as I came to notice. Just another of Mindfire's wonders. When I was finished, I drew up each end of the wire to form a bow. My work here was finally complete. I clambered up atop of the stack, as I had come to call it, and rested. The men in the pink coats came then, with their soaring wings and masks of white. They were carrying a large nozzle that immediately filled me up with Mindfire. I saw these two men as guardians and called over to them. "Fellow believers, welcome to my altar." Neither of them responded through the white masks, but at the touch of two pairs of hands clutching me from either side, I got the idea that they were going to bring me back to their church. I don't remember much of what happened after that. I was a blind man being guided through uncharted land. I do remember being carried down what seemed like stairs at a point in the center of the forest. There was the sound of a large metal door being swung open, and then we were descending. I was then thrown into the cell that I'm currently residing in. The cell is about 2 meters in length and 3 feet high. Although I'm somewhat grateful of what they're doing for me, I am suffering from this awful sense of dread. See, I'm not allowed to talk to anybody, and that didn't feel too bad for the past few days, but now, I don't know. It's just sort of started. It's also quite warm in here, and I'm finding it hard to breath. I think they've opened up the door now because it feels slightly cooler and I can hear these muffled sounds. Hands are reaching for me now, groping around the page. I imagine they're looking for this entry, so I'm just going to end now. As always, praise Mindfire and its creator. Please turn the heat down. Charles Patrickson. My hands were unable to keep a grasp on the paper, and it flopped out my reach. I must have appeared to look pale because I felt like a sick dog. Usually things like gore tend not to affect me, but this was different. It was like when a deranged psychopath tries to justify his actions by the perspective that he is the innocent one, but oh God, I know it was World War I, and so much more disgusting things happen, but I'd never read anything like this. There was the fact as well that at any point I could have stopped reading and move on, but I didn't. I wouldn't let me. My overbearing sense of curiosity. There was one more page left. This last page was different to the others. It appeared to be printed from some computer program. The background was primarily made up of a dark navy with small white text lapsed over it in what appeared to be German. It was like I was addicted to some bad habit because before I even realized it, I was halfway through translating the document. Even this realization couldn't stop me because this was all slowly beginning to make sense. After what seemed like an eternity of sifting through and slowly translating each letter and word, I was finished. I'm beginning to think that this thing is far bigger than I initially thought. The following is the English version of the document. Project Mindfire subject name, 6X subject location, Cell B9, 5th floor location of testing, testing trench -2, 3 miles from base mental state, unknown substance of testing, Mindfire gas contents classified, time period of testing, 20 days analysis from Dr. Hike. At 16 o'clock on the 25th of April, we fired a test round of the gas to judge the subject's reactions, while other subjects seemed inclined to avoid the gas at all costs. 6X showed no form of resistance to the gas and appeared more relaxed than the others, although a recent test in the lab showed that his blood contained twice the amount of oxygen to a regular sample for unexplained reasons. On day 15, we increased 6X's intake of the gas from to regular intervals to 3C attachment. His heart rate exceeded its previous average during random periods. We also tested his reactions to letting a cameraman leave and the delivery of the gas's name. He took no notice to either. Side effects include constant dependency on gas, screaming and spastic gestures during sleep, ability to see some objects in different colors through gas, and not being able to feel pains that would prove unbearable to anyone. 6X was found with deep wounds all over his body from what we can assume is mainly from the barbed wire. We were also unable to stop him constantly grinning. Our final result was successful in wiping out the squad, although the gas failed to be both practical or efficient. Project Mindfire will be permanently discontinued and is not liable for battle purposes. 6X has been successfully exterminated in the furnace room by this time, and a distress signal was sent to the nearest British cap from Test Trench 5. Finally, I fear that the gas used is all too similar to the gas proposed to use in the sleep experiments. Until further notice, keep the gas in storage. See file attachment on back. But that was it. There was no attachment on the back, just a single report. I don't know how to feel after reading this. Hell, it was disturbing, but I wasn't disturbed by that. The thing that disturbs me is how much bigger this whole thing seems than I originally thought. Just to think that this was only one file among probably thousands. Charles Patrickson is just one tiny puzzle piece of something much darker. On top of that is the fact that not a single person alive knows it exists. I searched up on the web about it, by the way. The best thing I found was a software advertisement, and afterwards I just continued on with my regular life like nothing ever happened. I've never had another of those disturbing Charles visions afterwards. However, I do still think of one statement from the newspaper article found beside the envelope at the end of the report in smaller print to everything else. Bodies of men found in random trench surrounded by forestry with not a British or German outpost for over 100 miles in every direction. Story 251, the 27th of June 2009. Since quite early childhood, I've always maintained a fascination with Area 51. Now I ought to make it clear that I am not some sort of deluded conspiracy lunatic, although the wild speculations about its activities have equally enthralled me since being very young, and fueled several of my attempts at short works of science fiction. I simply find the notion that there are places in the world that the powers that be seem so desperate to keep hidden fascinating, and it has been a bit of an amateur hobby for a long time to try and discover some of the truth surrounding it. It was certainly more of an obsession in my younger years than it is now. However, as I gradually moved into the field of journalism, I discovered that it was not a topic that held very much credibility in the world of professional writing. Most editors would scoff at suggestions of writing a piece on it, even if it was merely speculative, saving those kinds of reports for silly season or slow news weeks. I eventually decided that it might be interesting to write an article for personal benefit, detailing and critiquing some of the theories surrounding the infamous air base. I put a call out on my blog for people to help me find some of the more outlandish theories, partly out of laziness, but also because I thought there would be a wider scope of oddity if I asked outside sources. Sadly, I received no replies for this request. I did, however, receive a lone, anonymous contact. The contact in question was a gentleman who claimed to have worked at the base from the mid to late 90s. For the sake of his privacy and, potentially, his freedom, I will omit his name, age, etc. He approached me very cautiously and in writing, seemingly trying to avoid whatever electronic surveillance may be kept on him by his former employers, although why he presumed that anybody observing his behavior would not monitor his post was beyond me. His sketchiness over some minor details in his initial correspondence and the unspecified level of security and observation he claimed to have on him made me wary of him at first, but he presented me with some very interesting morsels of information regarding his former occupation, and I eventually managed to negotiate a meeting with him. Naturally, I was very excited to be speaking with this gentleman. We met publicly, choosing somewhere open and busy. Before he even spoke, I noticed his mannerisms were skittish and nervy, and his drawn face seemed to suggest an addict of some form or another. He stated outright that there were some details, such as names of former colleagues or people in charge, that he would point-blank refuse to reveal, regardless of how many times I asked him, as his problems were with himself and the things he encountered at the base, and not with the personnel he used to work alongside with. In spite of his current circumstances, he claimed to still have a deep sense of respect for many of his peers and colleagues, and risking their careers was not something he was willing to do. He did, however, feel that what he encountered was something that he needed to speak about, having had well over 10 years of reflection on it and the vast potential impact it may still pose. I was very close to informing him that, if I published his claims, and they were in any way taken seriously by a large amount of people, his former colleagues' careers could be put at risk anyway. I must admit that I refrained from telling him this. As selfish as it may sound, his deer-in-headlights mannerism made me wary, and I did not want to frighten him off. Whilst disappointed that I may not get any further leads or possible interviewees out of him, I accepted his conditions. I began by asking about some of its history, whilst he told me he was not an expert on its past. He did tell me some of the better-known facts amongst the personnel on the base. Area 51, he told me, was brought into operation in the latter part of the Second World War. He did not give me specific dates, which was slightly frustrating and was considerably smaller than it is now. Its purpose was originally to design and test out experimental weapons, reconnaissance technologies, and aircraft, but was often considered amongst the upper echelons of power in the American Air Force as one of the less important bases, focusing their defenses and their money on its larger and more productive facilities. While it had links to some of the components of important technologies, including some designs that would later go on to be used in the stealth plane, it was not particularly influential in the field of research and development, and, surprisingly, faced closure at one point in around 1949 because of slipping standards and inefficient usage of funds. Its management was replaced, and standards began to improve, with its funding being spent on expanding the base to allow it to work on new areas of research, including, but not limited to, nuclear, biological, and psychological methods of warfare. I must admit that this rung quite positively with me. Despite my interest in the base over the years, I have always been skeptical as to its alleged involvement with aliens and the paranormal, believing it instead to hold unsettling secrets of a much more terrestrial nature, such as ethics-free science and cruel new weapons systems. The vast majority of people I have discussed the topic with over the years have leapt straight to the aliens theory, something I have always found extremely irritating. To hear someone who seemed to be genuine giving me facts that I could find a lot more believable was encouraging. What he told me next began as a disappointment, but soon turned into something much more unsettling. As he had been informed when he took the job in around 1993, the base's operations took a dramatic shift in 1964 when a bright object appeared in the sky around 5 miles east of the base. Sometime in April of that year, the Cold War was still at a high, being only 2 years since the Cuban Missile Crisis, and despite an apparent cooling off period since the hotline between Moscow and Washington had been created to allow the USA and the USSR to discuss and negotiate any further incident. Tensions between the Americans and their Russian foes were still high, as was mistrust of the other side. Believing this initially to be the start of some form of deceptive attack, the base went on to high alert, and all base troops were mobilized and deployed to the site within 20 minutes. Having informed the White House of the strike, it is believed that President Johnson immediately phoned Nikita Khrushchev via the hotline, where he claimed no knowledge of any such attack. Naturally, this was taken with a large pinch of salt, but Johnson apparently halted calls for an immediate retaliation from some of his more enthusiastic advisers, in case the Soviets were in fact telling the truth. Base troops were informed to investigate the source of the light immediately, and to inform the White House directly of their findings as soon as was possible. The light source had, as speculated, fallen to Earth quite close by. The impact site was smoldering and burning upon discovery, leaving a sizable crater behind. Having ruled out a nuclear or artillery strike quite soon, seeing how there was no explosion heard, and in regards to the nuclear strike, they were all still alive, they began to speculate that what must have fallen to Earth was a satellite, a light aircraft, or possibly even a surveillance drone. However, all this was disproved. When they investigated the crater further, they found no wreckage, no mound of twisted metal and burnt-out components that would suggest a failed piece of equipment which had crash-landed. Instead, they found a small black box. Troops who initially made the discovery were returned to base immediately and decontaminated, replaced by hazmat teams wearing radiation suits and wielding Geiger counters. However, these teams discovered no radioactive material on the cube at all. Base staff could not decide what could be done with the object. Disposal experts were sent in immediately to destroy the object in a controlled explosion, in the firm belief that whatever it was probably a risk and should therefore be dealt with. When the object could not be destroyed using a variety of disposal methods, including explosives, fire, and acid, all involved were baffled. Troops were even instructed to fire at the object at will, but the object didn't show signs of even a scratch. Reluctantly, base command was informed by the White House to remove the object for further investigation. At the base, a highly secured area was cleared, in which the box was kept underneath a temporary tarpaulin until a more permanent and secure location for it could be created, watched for 3 days by armed guards. In that time, a concrete, lead-reinforced bunker was built, and the object was moved inside. The box received observations and experiments almost constantly, ranging from observing its response to an electrical current to its response to gamma rays, but it always remained entirely unaffected. Eventually, as the years passed, it was firmly believed by site researchers that the box was entirely indestructible, and they instead took to observing it daily in case it showed any change at all, with regular experiments to attempt to work out its makeup. The potential benefits were obviously incalculable. a material that could not be destroyed by any weapon known to man. Naturally, it was kept tightly under lock and key. The security systems employed on that room, according to my contact, make Fort Knox look like an open door. However, despite the unending interest in the box displayed by the vast majority of the American military, it did not appear to be willing to unveil its secrets any time soon. A daily routine of observation and theorizing developed and stayed in place for close to 30 years. It is here that my contact came in. In 1993, he was fresh-faced and closed, receiving a degree in particle physics, at that time living in Chicago. It was around this time that he was approached by government officials who had taken an interest in his potential and who came to him with an offer of a job that they claimed would make use of his talents. This job was at Area 51. He was made to sign a secrecy pact and soon relocated to Nevada. The job itself offered much less than he originally perceived. He was at the base in the capacity as little more than a glorified lab assistant, aiding the more senior researchers with their experiments. That said, the pay was very good and he had room for career progression. So he was, for the most part, contented. He first encountered the box after 2 weeks at the base, after some initial training and general orientation to the job. He had been informed of it repeatedly over this 2-week introductory period and its alleged properties, but encountering it was more than he anticipated. The readings it gave off were enough to make the vast majority of the staff feel uneasy. Whilst it gave off small amounts of heat and occasional low-level electrical signals, it had no mass. This was both perplexing and unsettling, as this was, to all intents and purposes, not possible. And yet the box was there. This impossibility made it all the more worrying. My contact described it as somehow feeling impossible. The box looked and appeared in some way as though it shouldn't be there, although he could not sum up why. He had received considerable training and information on the unpleasant feelings the box gave off, and all of the staff had at least one story about how the box had made them feel uncomfortable or somehow disturbed them. There were also several reports that the box had a profound effect on electrical equipment if they were brought close to it, wiping laptops clean of information, frying the batteries of mobile phones, even breaking the bulbs in flashlights. My contact's laptop was itself wiped of data in 1996, whilst running a basic observational routine. However, his other memorable encounter with the box would ultimately become lore at the base and lead him to the state he was in today. One morning in August 1998, whilst running diagnostics on the object, my contact described an unusually high feeling of anxiety in the room, which he believed to be emanating from the box. He described a feeling of tension, unease, and panic, as though he felt threatened by its presence. This was unusual for him, as over his career at the base, he had grown used to the unusual effects the box had on people. On this morning, it was worse than he had ever remembered. Despite this, he still managed to focus on the diagnostics. On reflection, he claimed he wished he hadn't. For the first time in nearly 35 years, the box had mass. Its reading went off the scale. Electrical power, heat, mass, energy, all going to unnatural degrees. At this point, the laptop corrupted and the screen died. It would later be revealed that the hard drive had been entirely destroyed. Looking over to the box, he noticed another change. It had opened. My contact at this point went vague and incredibly withdrawn. He described little, staring off into the middle distance, but what he did say made me feel deeply uncomfortable. In a minute voice, a voice I could have easily mistaken for that of a child, he told me, there was just a void, just nothing, no sound, no feeling, no light, no time, just nothing. After this, he required a few moments to gather his thoughts and pull himself together, and we sat in silence. Trying to deal with this memory and myself, trying to make sense of it. What did he mean, nothing? He continued with the story after a little while. He told me that he had blacked out temporarily, and when he came to, he was outside the bunker, which was under lockdown. Outside, he found a scene of abject destruction, burning wreckage, twisted metal, site personnel running around frenzied trying to return some semblance of order. This initially confused him, but the strangeness of the situation soon became apparent to him when he was told that the base in its entirety had been struck by what was referred to later as a telekinetic explosion. Objects ranging from pens to office chairs to aircraft had begun to levitate and move in the general direction of the bunker. After almost a minute of this, the objects violently dispersed outwards, the bunker being the center of the blast. 14 people were killed by the debris, and several others were injured. The objects affected were not just metals, so some kind of magnet was ruled out as the cause, but it did not seem to affect living matter. Armed personnel had rushed to the bunker after identifying it as the center of the blast, forcing an override of the security systems. They found him passed out in the corner, apparently shielding his eyes. The box, according to my contact, was now unopened. He was removed from the bunker, taken away, and underwent almost a full 24 hours of decontamination, examinations, and debriefings. Being the first and only person directly on the scene, officials were initially skeptical of his claims that the box had opened. The bunker's CCTV system had been obliterated in the incident. Along with his laptop, the readings he took and the incident itself were now lost, with no evidence to support his claims. Despite this, however, some sympathy for his story was later gathered, especially when it was the only link to the explosion they had. Security and examinations of the box were doubled, with an armed guard inside the bunker at all hours of the day, and my contact was given therapy for severe anxiety and stress. The base was cleared of wreckage, and repairs were almost completed after a week and a half. However, when my contact returned to the bunker with investigators a few days later to try and provide some further evidence for his version of events, he encountered something highly sinister. On the back wall of the bunker, visible immediately upon entrance, was a perfectly circular black ring around the height of a man, looking very much like a burn mark. Investigators informed him that the ring had been present when he had been dragged out, and attempts to remove it yielded nothing. My contact told me that something about it made him vomit, and he had to leave. Around 2 weeks of sleeplessness and severe mood swings following the incident caused him to file for resignation. He did not feel that he could remain at the base, for reasons he could not understand or explain for himself. Since the incident, he had been feeling restless and on edge, especially when on his own. He also remembers a series of unusual events occurring in and around the base, Several security cameras around the base had short-circuited, along with some motion sensors in the more secure areas. Site staff reported missing objects, namely food items and electrical equipment, and most bizarrely, the base dog was found dead in the mess hall for days after the incident. Examinations of its body suggested that it had been hit by a car, but this was not possible, as no car could have gotten into the mess hall without destroying it, and the dog was seen to enter, but not to emerge. By several eyewitnesses. An autopsy was performed, and it was discovered that the dog's muscles had contracted so suddenly and so violently that it had broken several bones, including its back. Evidence of poisons or toxins were searched for, but none was found. The best guess that could be made was that the dog underwent such severe shock that its muscles went into a fatal spasm and eventually seized up to an unimaginable degree. I recall my contact detailing these events with an almost frightened fascination. I speculated that he had pondered these events for a long time. A week after filing his resignation, he said his farewells, and was escorted from the base to return to his old life in Chicago, where he intended to return to the degree he had yet to finish and attempt to put his former job behind him. Why it had affected him so deeply, he did not know, but he was adamant that he felt he had to get away from that place as soon as he possibly could. He told me that what happened next was what turned him to drink. As they left the base, he decided to take one last look back. This he immediately came to regret. In the dust cloud kicked up by the SUV, standing facing the base, was a figure. My contact didn't describe the figure. This time, it was not because he found the memory too difficult to describe, but because he simply couldn't remember it at all. He passed out almost immediately after seeing it, and his memory of its appearance is practically non-existent. He said that all he can remember was the most overwhelming sense of dread and terror he has ever experienced in his life. Something about this character inspired a feeling of fear within him that was stronger than anything he had encountered previously or since. He was revived by the driver of the SUV, but did not inform them of what he had seen, and yet it still haunted him. Something about this memory somehow eclipsed the experience in the bunker, and the feeling of horror at the thought of it stuck with him from that moment onwards. Eventually, he took to drink to try and rid himself of this never-ending feeling of unease, but its help has been limited. After he told me this, we went our separate ways, as he asked if we could stop, as he had nothing more to offer on the subject and was feeling quite unhappy again. So I returned to my hotel room to write up his claims. I have not heard from him since. Now, I must clarify here that he didn't tell me anything about being pursued or followed by this figure. He was not being stalked by some Slenderman-esque entity that toyed with his mind and followed him wherever he went. Before he left, he told me he never saw it again. Only the feeling, the memory of that terror, stayed behind, which, as it became apparent to me during our interview, was no less scarring. I will not tell you outright that my contact's claims are the gospel truth. I still have my doubts about what he told me, and whether there was any truth in it whatsoever. What I do not doubt, however, is that he saw something at some point in his past that left some very deep scars in his mind. It would be a valid argument on your part as a reader to say that he could have been acting, but I know sincerity when I see it, and I saw a sincerely traumatized individual. For these reasons, I cannot escape the nagging thought that there was something genuine in what he said, and that there really is something this sinister at the base. This change of heart has also led me to reevaluate the purpose of this article. My original intention was for this to be a purely speculative piece, assessing and investigating some of the claims about the base's reason for being. However, since I received word from my contact, the nature of this article has changed to actual potential evidence of alien activity on Earth and Area 51's involvement with it and in the process. So has my stance on publishing it. Perhaps I am simply being paranoid, but it's a level of professional paranoia I like to think might keep me out of federal custody if there is actually any truth in what he told me. A knock at the door from CIA spooks is not a risk I'd like to take, even for the sake of journalistic integrity. Perhaps this is just needless wariness, but I'd rather be wary than flaunt danger needlessly. So, unless an appropriate opportunity arises in which to publish this, where the sense of duty over showing it to the public overrides the risk of official reprimand, I will sit on this one for personal scrutiny and speculation. However, regardless of the reliability of these claims, it still unsettles me to even consider the notion that one of the most powerful military superpowers on Earth could be outwitted and confused by persons or forces unknown for so long. Even more so to think that these forces could still be in operation to this day. The 21st of March 2014. As stated at the end of the original article, I decided to hold off on publishing it until a time I thought it would be necessary and for the public benefit to do so. That time has now come. Unless the news has somehow bypassed you, which I highly doubt, you will be aware that 27 hours ago, emergency services in the Nevada area were on red alert as countless local communities gave reports of everyday objects moving of their own accord. A subsequent blast was reported, which killed several people and wounded many others. These objects had, according to witnesses, exploded away from whatever point they were originally moving towards. Naturally, hospitals were inundated with casualties, and police officers were working tirelessly to try and bring some calm to the situation. But all this was for nothing when eyewitness reports were received of a large black ring in the middle of the Nevada desert. The news soon hit the internet, and despite the presence of a specialist teams who were seemingly called in to quell the rumors, it continued to spread like wildfire. A global media rebellion against the American government ensued, with news networks the world over reporting on this inexplicable phenomenon. A cover-up of any sort was no longer an option. Satellite imagery later revealed the ring to be well over 15 miles in diameter, perfectly round and black in appearance, very much like a burn mark. The images also appeared to show an object at the center of the ring, namely a large, solitary black box. The media uprising in the wake of this incident has presented me with a situation where I no longer feel threatened to reveal what I know. If the U.S. cannot control its own national television networks, then I highly doubt they will be able to control independent online journalists. And, in light of these events, I think I would have published this even if the risks were still there. This is far too large a connection to simply ignore. Whatever doubts I had about my contact's claims are no more. I have nothing to offer here but speculation, but I believe what he encountered at the base was a scouting party, a surveyor so to speak, and that the black ring in the bunker was its window into our world. I also believe that what we're seeing now is no longer the scouting party. I believe that it's the invasion. Story 3, don't tell. I don't want to go to Mimi Linda's anymore. Brittany's little girl, Kristen, said as she was getting her ready to take to her mother's house. Brittany was confused by this. Her daughter never had a problem with going to her grandmother's house before. She always dropped Kristen off at her mother's in the morning and picked her up again after work. There were never any complaints about this before. Why? What's wrong, Chris? She asked. I don't like the little girl, was the response. Brittany's mother had just moved into her new house only weeks ago, and though Brittany had already met most of the neighbors, she didn't recall any of them having a little girl. What little girl? Brittany asked. Kristen was silent for a moment, as if she wasn't sure she should continue. The girl in Mimi's room. She comes when I'm watching TV in Mimi's bed and says mean things to me, and she has a Band-Aid over her eye because her daddy hit her. The blood makes her look scary. I don't like it. Brittany was deeply disturbed and confused by this answer. She didn't understand how Kristen could have come up with such a story. She knelt in front of her daughter, taking her by the shoulders, and looked into her eyes. Chris, what are you talking about? Is this a real little girl, or are you making her up? Kristen stared at her mother silently for a moment, then shook her head as if refusing to say any more. Brittany sighed in frustration and stood again. She didn't have time for games. She was already running late. Deciding to drop the subject for the time being, she got Kristen into the car and left for her mother's house. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Brittany's mother met them at the door once they arrived. She bent down and gave Kristen a hug. Want to go watch TV, sweetie? She asked. Kristen looked at her grandmother and shook her head, then walked in without saying anything. She headed down the hall to the back room that she used when she spent time at her grandmother's house. But as she passed her grandmother's bedroom, she walked by with caution and peeked in carefully before moving on. This reminded Brittany of their earlier conversation. Hey, Mom. Do you know anything about a little girl? Linda looked at her puzzled. What little girl? Brittany wasn't sure how to explain what her daughter had said. Well, Kristen said there was a little girl here and that she was. She hesitated, then shook her head. Never mind, it's probably nothing. I have to get going or I'll be late. Now that she was talking about it out loud, it sounded kind of silly. She hugged her mother goodbye and went to work. Though the strange talk with her daughter was still on Brittany's mind, it was soon forgotten as things became busy at the office. The day went on normally, and at the end of it, Brittany picked up her daughter and brought her back home. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. That night, as Brittany was getting Kristen ready for her bath, she noticed 3 scratches on her daughter's upper arm. Chris, what happened? She asked in concern. Her daughter looked at her and said in a quiet voice, I was playing with Chloe and got scratched. Brittany knew Chloe was a playful puppy, but she didn't think she'd hurt her daughter. It was probably just an accident, though. She talked to her mother about clipping the puppy's nail so that it wouldn't happen again. Brittany finished giving Kristen her bath and put her to bed. Before she turned out the light, her daughter asked, Do I have to go to Mimi's tomorrow? Brittany looked back at her daughter. No, Mommy's off tomorrow, so you can stay home. She remembered what her daughter had said that morning and paused in the doorway. Did you see the mean little girl again? she asked. Kristen quickly shook her head and rolled over with her back to her mother, hugging her teddy tightly. Brittany watched her daughter for a moment, then turned out the light and went to her own bedroom. Since she had the next day off from work, Brittany stayed up late watching television. As she was looking for something to watch, she came across a documentary on the paranormal. She had an interest in such things and decided to watch it. The documentary spoke of entities that died violent or traumatic deaths and became restless spirits unable to move on. They would often stay in the place of their death and haunt it long after they die. Sometimes there would be residual hauntings, nothing more than an echo of past events, and people replaying itself over and over. Some were intelligent, using methods such as sounds and visual activity to make their presence known and even interact with the living. Then came the mention of children and spirits. How young children are more sensitive to the paranormal than adults and can often see things that adults can't. Some spirits can interact or communicate with children and even attach themselves to them. Sometimes the spirit can be friendly, but there are times when the entity is dangerous. They can influence the child in negative ways, telling them to do bad things, or they may even hurt or scare the child. These hauntings usually cause strange or negative behavior, and a child may be reluctant to talk about it out of fear of being hurt. Brittany stopped paying attention at that point. Now her thoughts turned to her daughter. The odd behavior and mention of a little girl in her mother's house that couldn't possibly exist, and even the disturbing description she gave. She began to wonder if the scratches on her daughter's arm were actually from the puppy or something else. Was it all just coincidence? Was Kristen just going through a phase, or was something else going on? It all seemed a bit far-fetched, but there wasn't enough to go on. She decided she would talk to her mother about it the next day, then see what she could find out. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The next morning Brittany gave her mother a call, hoping to gain more information from her. "Mom, do you know if the people who lived in the house before you had a daughter?" she asked. Linda paused, as if thinking, "No, pretty sure they just had to boys." Why? Brittany looked into the living room at her daughter. She was watching Dora the Explorer and paying no mind to her mother. Brittany spoke softly anyway, not wanting her to hear. "Kristen seems to think there's a little girl in your house, and she doesn't like her. She says she's mean to her and says bad things, and that the way the little girl looks scares her because she's bloody." Now that she said it out loud, Brittany felt kind of foolish. She couldn't imagine how strange it must have sounded to her mother. There was a long moment of silence on the other end of the phone. "Mom, is that why Kristen doesn't like coming over anymore?" her mother suddenly asked. Brittany was caught off guard by the sudden question. Did she say something? "She doesn't have to. Lately she just doesn't seem to want to be here. She doesn't like going in the back or watching TV in my bed anymore like she used to. And she asks how long before you come get her a lot. It was never like this before. She was always happy to come over, but now she doesn't seem to like it anymore." The description of Kristen's behavior at her mother's house made Brittany feel uneasy. Did it really have something to do with a ghost, or was Kristen acting out for attention? Her thoughts were interrupted by her mother's loud yawn. "Sorry, I haven't been sleeping well," she said. "Why, what's wrong?" Brittany asked. "Well, I keep hearing weird noises at night and Linda's voice trailed off. "And what?" Brittany asked. "Well, sometimes while I'm sleeping, I get woken up by something that feels like a tug on my sheets. Once I thought I even heard a giggle. I just roll over and go back to sleep thinking I was just dreaming. But now that I think about it, there have been some strange things going on." Brittany's uneasiness grew. "Like what?" "Well, there are the weird noises from time to time that tug on my bed sheets, and sometimes something isn't where I thought I put it, like it had been moved. And there are times when it feels unusually cold in my room, colder than it should considering it's summer and all. And Chloe acts weird, too. She growls and barks at the empty air or acts restless, like something's making her nervous. I figured she just wasn't used to the new house yet." Brittany remembered hearing that animals were just as sensitive to the paranormal as young children, if not more. "I never really paid much attention to all this before, but now that I'm thinking about it, it all seems kind of strange." She paused as if thinking again. "There is one other thing. I thought I heard Kristen talking to someone a couple of weeks ago. I looked in on her and she was playing with her tea set and dolls. I thought maybe she was just playing pretend. But what if she wasn't?" Linda's voice had a hint of nervousness to it now. "Mom, maybe you should look into that house's background or something just to see if there's anything weird about it," Brittany suggested. She wasn't sure what she was expecting to find, or if there really was anything to find, but they had no way of knowing unless they tried. "I guess I could. Not sure if I really want to know, though. I might end up moving again." Her mother laughed weakly at her attempted joke. Brittany started wondering if she should leave Kristen elsewhere during the date, just until they figured things out. "I think I might leave Kristen at Mama's house during the day instead of yours, just for a while," she said. Brittany's grandmother was getting up in age, but she always enjoyed visits from her great-grandchildren. Brittany just hoped it would solve the problem, even if it was only temporary. "Well, all right, I guess," Linda said, sounding a bit disappointed. Brittany couldn't help feeling guilty. She knew her mother enjoyed the company she got from Kristen since she lived alone. "Thanks, Mom. Let me know what you find." After hanging up with her mother, Brittany looked in on Kristen again. She was still watching Dora the Explorer and answering Dora's questions. "Chris, how would you like to stay at Mama's instead of Mimi's for a while?" Kristen turned around to look at her mother. "I won't go to Mimi's house anymore. It's just for a little while," Brittany said. Kristen nodded solemnly. "Okay, Mommy." She looked back at the TV, but now seemed less enthusiastic than before and had grown quiet. The sudden change in her daughter's behavior added on to Brittany's concern. She wasn't sure what to make of the situation between the strange activity in her mother's house and the effect it was having on Kristen. Was there really something going on, or was her daughter just having a childhood fantasy and would grow out of it soon? But what about the strange things occurring in her mother's house? Could it just be coincidence? Brittany felt frustrated knowing there was nothing she could do until they found out more about the house's history. For now, all she could do was wait. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. That weekend Brittany was off. She hadn't heard anything from her mother yet. Kristen spent the days with her great-grandmother, and there had been no more mention of a little girl or strange behavior. It brought Brittany some relief to have her daughter back to normal. She was almost sure the whole incident had been a phase. Maybe just a little girl's way of getting her working mother's attention, or her way of saying she didn't like her grandmother's new house. Either way, Brittany was just glad that things were better now. She sat on the couch with her laptop while Kristen lay on the living room floor coloring in a Dora the Explorer coloring book. Brittany's cell phone suddenly rang and she got up to answer it. It was her mother. "Britt, I'm on my way over. There's something I need to show you, but first check your email. I sent you something I found. I think you need to see it." Linda's voice sounded disturbed. Brittany froze at the sound of her mother's tone. "What is it?" she asked. "Just go check," her mother said. "I can't talk now. I'm driving. I'll be there soon." There was a cold feeling in the pit of Brittany's stomach as she hung up the phone. She almost didn't want to look at her email, but she sat on the couch and picked up her laptop again. She opened her account and clicked on the email from her mother. It was a news article dated about 13 years ago. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the title, "Girl Beaten to Death by Father in Home." She scrolled down reading the details of the article. A 6-year-old girl was being abused by her alcoholic father. After being questioned by a teacher who was concerned about the bruises on the girl, she told her that it was done by her father. When the father found out what she had told the teacher, he began beating her in a fit of rage and ended up killing her. Paramedics pronounced the child dead at the scene. Cause of death was massive head trauma. The father was arrested and found guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. At the bottom of the article was a picture of a little girl in a kiddie pool in the front yard of her home. The house in the background was the very house Brittany's mother was living in now. She was an adorable little girl with light blonde hair pulled up into pigtails and pretty blue eyes. A wide smile with a missing front tooth adorned a somewhat chubby little face. She looked a little younger than 6 in the picture. Perhaps it was a photo from an earlier, happier time. A tear rolled down Brittany's cheek as she stared at the picture. Her heart ached for the young life that had been tragically cut short. How could someone do something so terrible to a child, especially their own? She looked at her own daughter and couldn't imagine ever hurting her like that. At that moment, Brittany recalled the way Kristen described the girl she had seen. How she had a Band-Aid over her eye because her father hit her, and that she was bloody. Brittany slowly stood and walked over to Kristen carrying the laptop. She knelt and turned it to face her daughter, Kreese. "Is this the little girl in Nimi's house?" Kristen looked at the picture, then looked up at her mother. Her face was blank. Her daddy told her not to tell anyone he was hitting her. She should have listened, and he wouldn't have hurt her like that. "I wasn't supposed to tell anyone about her either because she doesn't like it when people say she's not real. But I was bad and told anyway. That's why she scratched me." She looked back at her coloring book and continued coloring as if it were just a casual conversation. Brittany almost dropped her laptop from the shock. The sudden ring of the doorbell made Brittany jump. She remembered her mother had said she was on her way and put the laptop down, hurrying to the door. Her mother looked somewhat pale when she opened it. "I'm freaking out, Britt. This is really messed up," she said as she walked in past Brittany, clutching something in her hand. Brittany followed her mother into the kitchen and found her pacing back and forth nervously. "Mom, what's wrong?" Linda stopped pacing and looked at her. "Well, I talked to the people who lived in the house before me, and they said they didn't know anything about the previous owners, but they were sure that a little girl lived there. In the front bedroom, they found disturbing drawings on the wall inside the closet that looked like they were done by a girl. They put wallpaper up inside to cover them up. Brittany was confused. Wallpaper? Why not just paint the walls? They did, her mother said nervously. The drawings kept coming back. Brittany felt chills run down her spine. Kept coming back through the paint. Linda nodded. They thought for sure their sons were doing it, but the boys insisted it wasn't them. They said it was the girl. Brittany's blood ran cold. It was the same thing Kristen had spoken of. She said they figured the boys were just making up story so they wouldn't get in trouble and just let it go. Anyway, they ended up putting in the wallpaper and covered everything up. I went in the closet the other day and ripped the wallpaper out. I found the drawings. Linda held her hand out and revealed some photos. Brittany slowly took them from her and began looking through them. She felt like she was going to be sick. There were doodles of faces varying in size along one side of the closet. Most of them appeared to be of a man, a very angry one, with a big mouth as if he were yelling. Others looked like they were of a sad little girl that was crying. There were even a couple of figures, a big one holding up its arm as if about to bring it down, and a smaller one that looked like a little girl bent down as if cowering with the words, "Don't hit me," coming from the smaller figure. There were other words like "way" and "what did I do?" written on the wall, misspelling on purpose. Brittany leaned against the counter for support. She felt weak as she stared in horror at the photos. "You said these were in the front bedroom?" "Yeah," Linda answered. Brittany looked up at her mother. "That's the room you're in, isn't it?" she asked quietly. Her mother was fidgeting nervously as she nodded. "Yeah, and that's not all. Unfortunately, I started asking around about the family that lived in the house before the previous owners and found an older couple who's been in the neighborhood for over 20 years. They told me about the family and the little girl that lived there. Apparently, the mother got into an accident on her way to work one morning and was killed. Soon after the mother died, things changed for them. The father got depressed and started drinking heavily, and the little girl stopped playing with the other children and coming outside like she used to. She wasn't happy and cheerful anymore. They never suspected he was beating her, though, not until the day the ambulance showed up, and they brought her little body out on a gurney cover in a blood-stained sheet. Linda's voice faltered and she stopped. Tears built up in her eyes as she shook her head. "How could someone do that?" she asked in a trembling voice. "How could he just beat his own little girl and kill her?" Brittany shook her head. "I don't know, Mom. I just don't know. How could anyone lay their hands on a child like that?" As a mother, she found the act unthinkable and unforgivable. It made her sick just thinking about it. Brittany looked at the pictures of the drawings again. Everything was starting to make sense now. This poor little girl had been betrayed and killed by the very person who was supposed to love and take care of her. Now she was a restless spirit, full of anger and unable to move on. It was heartbreaking. "I'd like to meet that bastard and give him a taste of his own medicine," she said angrily. "Unfortunately, that's not possible," Linda said bitterly. "He's dead." Brittany looked at her mother in shock. "The article said he got life in prison. Did they change it to the death penalty?" "No, the couple I talked to told me he died not long after killing his daughter. Apparently he wasn't completely unremorseful for what he did. He couldn't live with the guilt of his crime. He committed suicide in prison a couple of months after he was sentenced. It wouldn't bring the little girl back, though, and it wouldn't release her spirit. But you know, Despite all these facts, we still don't have any evidence of a ghost, Brittany said. Linda reached into her purse that was sitting on the counter. Actually, there is one more thing. She pulled out a digital recorder I remembered hearing on Ghost Hunters and other paranormal shows that if you use a recorder you could catch the voice of an entity. I put one in my room and went grocery shopping. When I came back, I listened to it. She slowly held it out to Brittany. I caught something. Brittany looked at the recorder in her mother's hand and took it from her. She pressed the play button, and it picked up where her mother had stopped it. For a moment, there was nothing. A bird chirping in the tree out front, a car passing by on the street. Then she heard it, a little more than a whisper. A little voice with only one thing to say, "Don't tell." Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Brittany and Linda finished putting the last of the boxes into the moving van. Brittany's uncle pulled the door closed, then climbed into the driver's seat. Living alone was becoming financially difficult for Linda, the bills becoming more than she could handle on her own. Since Brittany and Kristen were the only ones living in their house, it had been decided that Brittany's mother would move in and help out her single mother-daughter. "Is that everything?" Brittany asked. Her mother nodded. "Yeah, I think so. Where's Kristen?" Brittany looked around. Her daughter was nowhere in sight. "Maybe she's inside. I'll go look." The inside of the house was bare now. Everything had finally been cleared out. She saw no sign of Kristen at first, but then she heard a voice coming from the hallway. It was Kristen's. Brittany quietly made her way to the hallway's entrance and peeked into the front room. Previously her mother's bedroom. Kristen was standing in the middle of the room facing the closet. "It's okay, I forgive you," she said in the direction of the open closet doors. Brittany slowly walked in behind her daughter, noticing the air in the room felt cold. Too cold for summer weather, and too cold for a house that no longer had the air conditioner running. "Chris, who are you talking to?" she asked. Kristen turned around to face her mother. "Jenny," she said. Brittany walked up closer to Kristen, looking at the empty space in the closet that she had been talking toward. "Who's Jenny, sweetie?" She already had a feeling before even asking. "The little girl. She was saying sorry for hurting me. Her daddy always said sorry after hurting her too." She looked back at the closet. "No. We're not going away because of you. It's because Mimi is having trouble paying the bills." She paused, as if listening to someone talking. "I don't know. It's a grown-up thing, I think." Brittany got goosebumps and reached down to take Kristen's hand. "Well, it's time to go. Mimi and Uncle Kurt are waiting." As they started to walk out, Kristen looked back and gave a little wave to the open closet. "Bye, Jenny. I hope you can see your mommy again one day." Brittany didn't stop as she walked her daughter out of the house, closing and locking the door behind them. Her mother was already in her car waiting on them. "Everything all right?" she asked through the open window. "Yeah, everything's fine," Brittany responded. She hooked Kristen into her seat, then went around to the driver's side and got in. Starting up her car, she took one last look at the house. For a moment she thought she saw something in the front bedroom window. A pale face with light-colored hair tinge, with a darker color hanging down around it. Brittany quickly blinked her eyes and looked again. It was gone. It was probably just the glare from the sun on the glass, at least. That's what she told herself. She pulled into the street and headed for the corner with her mother's car and the moving van following behind. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. She watched them drive away in their cars. Her new friend was gone already. They got along at first, but then the other girl said she didn't like the way she looked and didn't want to see her anymore. It made her mad, and that's why she said mean things to her. She wished she could wear nice clothes and brush her hair again, but everything was bloody now. Jenny turned and went back to her closet, the place she used to hide from her daddy in when he was mad. Her head was hurting and she wanted to rest. Maybe next time she wouldn't be mean to her new friend, but maybe next time they won't tell.